You've probably heard what happens to your brain when you die. The heart stops, the blood stops moving, the oxygen runs out, and the brain goes quiet, a light switching off. That is the version almost everyone carries around. It is also, as of a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2023, not quite what actually happens. What the data shows is almost the opposite. In the final moments, in at least some people, the brain does not go quiet. It surges. Electrical activity that the brain had been running at a baseline level for an entire lifetime suddenly spikes to levels higher than anything recorded during normal waking consciousness. One patient in the 2023 study showed gamma wave activity 300 times higher than it had been moments before death, not 3 times, 300 times, in the seconds after the heart stopped. The question of what that means, what the brain might be doing, and whether it tells us anything about what dying people actually experience is one of the most carefully studied and genuinely unresolved questions in neuroscience right now. And the answer, depending on which part of the data you're looking at, is either deeply comforting or deeply strange, and possibly both at once. Let's start with what we actually know, because the story of how this finding came to exist is almost as surprising as the finding itself. In 2013, a neuroscientist at the University of Michigan published a study in which she recorded the brain activity of rats as they underwent cardiac arrest. The assumption going into the experiment was the same assumption almost everyone holds, that a brain being starved of blood and oxygen would progressively slow down, go dim, and eventually flatline. What she found instead was that in the 30 seconds after the heart stopped, the rats' brains produced a surge of synchronized gamma waves, the highest frequency electrical oscillations the brain generates, and the ones most closely associated with alert, conscious processing. The dying brains weren't shutting down. They were, by the measure of their electrical output, more active than they had been while the rats were awake. That finding sat in the literature for nearly a decade. Then in 2022, a team of doctors at the University of Estonia happened to be monitoring an 87-year-old patient with an EEG when the man unexpectedly died. They had not set out to study death. The recording was just running, but what it captured completely by accident was the same pattern Borzygin had seen in rats, a surge of gamma activity in the seconds before and after cardiac arrest, particularly concentrated in a region of the brain called the temporoparietal junction, a region known to be involved in out-of-body experiences, self-awareness, and the sense of where the body ends and the world begins. Two independent lines of evidence, years apart, pointing in the same direction. That was enough for Borzygin to design a deliberate human study. Published in May of 2023, the study monitored 4 patients in the neurointensive care unit at the University of Michigan who were dying under EEG observation after cardiac arrest had left them comatose and unresponsive. When their families agreed to withdraw life support, the EEG kept running. 2 of the 4 patients showed something the researchers were not fully prepared for. In the seconds after ventilator removal, their brains produced a massive, organized surge of gamma activity. In one of those patients, gamma wave production reached 300 times its previous level, exceeding anything recorded in a healthy, conscious brain. And this surge was concentrated specifically in the temporoparietal junction, the same region the Estonian case study had flagged the year before, a region that, when activated in healthy people, produces experiences of leaving the body, of seeing oneself from outside, of being somewhere other than where the physical body is. The researchers were careful, as scientists are required to be, about what they could actually claim. They could not say the patients were conscious. They could not say the patients were experiencing anything. All 4 of them were comatose. But they could say that the brain, in those final moments, was generating the kind of organized, high-frequency electrical activity that in living, awake human beings is associated with conscious experience, and that it was doing so in a region specifically linked to the most commonly reported features of near-death experiences. Which brings us to near-death experiences themselves, because this is where the science gets genuinely complicated and where the honest answer is, we don't fully know yet. Around 10 to 20% of people who are resuscitated after cardiac arrest report some form of near-death experience. The features are remarkably consistent across cultures, countries, and centuries. A tunnel of light, a feeling of profound peace, a sense of leaving the body and watching the scene from above, a life review in which memories seem to play out with unusual clarity and speed, sometimes an encounter with people who have died. These accounts have been collected and studied seriously since the 1970s, when a physician named Raymond Moody published the first systematic analysis of them, and the core question has never changed. Is the brain generating these experiences, or is something else happening? Neuroscience has spent decades building explanations that sit firmly on the first side of that question. Oxygen deprivation alone can produce vivid hallucinations, as documented in fighter pilots subjected to high G-forces who report tunnel vision, out-of-body sensations, and encounters with light. The brain naturally produces a compound called DMT, which when administered externally in controlled research settings produces experiences strikingly similar to reported near-death accounts, including the sense of traveling through space, encountering presences, and a feeling that the experience is, in the words of people who report both, more real than real. Endorphins released under extreme physiological stress could account for the profound peace and absence of pain that almost every near-death account describes. REM intrusion, a state in which dreamlike activity breaks through into a waking or semi-waking brain, has been proposed as a mechanism for the vivid, narrative quality of the experience. None of these explanations, individually or together, has been proven to be the complete account. The Borgigan findings add a new layer rather than settling the question, because what the 2023 study tells us is that something is happening in the dying brain, something organized, something concentrated in specific regions, something that bears the electrical signature of conscious processing. What it cannot tell us is whether anyone is home to experience it. There's one detail from the research that I keep returning to. The temporoparietal junction, the region that surged most dramatically in the dying patient, is the same region that, when electrically stimulated in healthy people, produces immediate out-of-body experiences. Surgeons have been able to trigger them on demand during brain operations by touching this area with an electrode. The patient is awake on the table, hears the electrode touch, and suddenly reports floating above their own body looking down. When the electrode is removed, the experience stops. It is one of the most reliably produced phenomena in all of imagery, and the region that produces it was the most active region in the brains of at least 2 dying people in the moments after their hearts stopped. That is not proof of anything beyond the neurological, but it is a remarkable convergence. What we are left with is this: the assumption that dying is a simple shutdown, a clean cessation, a light going off, turns out to be incomplete at best. The brain does not simply stop. In some people, in some final window of seconds or minutes, it activates in a way we have not previously measured or understood. Whether that activation is the mechanism behind what people describe when they come back, whether it represents a last flickering of consciousness or something organized enough to constitute experience, whether the people who did not survive can tell us anything at all about what those moments were, these questions remain open. The science is real. The data exists. And what the data says, carefully and without overreach, is that the dying brain is doing something. We just don't know yet what it means to be inside it when it does. Maybe that uncertainty is the most honest place to end, because every person who has ever lived has this moment ahead of them, and none of the ones who have already passed through it have been able to send anything back. What we have instead are G ratings, gamma waves, a region of the brain that lights up when people feel themselves leave their bodies, and the recorded accounts of the roughly 10 to 20% who came close enough to report what they found there. The rest, for now, remains on the other side.